Well, it looks like we're live. Does it appear to be live to you, Tommy?
Yeah, it does appear to be live on my side.
All right, good. Well, um, I had a little opportunity tonight to jump on here and do a hangout. I just want to spend a couple of minutes addressing some things that we've all seen a lot if we pay attention to this to the online Google Plus community and the hangouts and everything. Um, and it happened the other night. Somebody came into one of True Empiricism's hangouts and basically was just being real braggy. Like, hey, I study science. I go to this prestigious school. I'm getting into this prestigious program. And you don't know anything. I know all this stuff. Hey, you're nothing compared to me. and the thing I just wanted to point out was that none of that is an argument. So somebody can be very braggy. And hey, you know what? Sometimes, you know, you're the stuff. You did some good things. You're smart or whatever. But that doesn't mean, by pointing that out, you're not making an argument, though. And I think sometimes people can get a little bit intimidated by that, or they might kind of interpret that as, dang, this guy, man, he's something else. And these guys are like nothing. The bottom line, though, it's not an argument. It's not an argument. Um, they still so that's what we see from the materialist side a lot. All right, so I'm contrasting the materialists contrasted with intelligent design, which is where I fall, and then contrasted with creationism, which I think Tommy falls under, right, Tommy?
Yes.
You're into creationism, okay. So, but from the materialist side, that's what we get a lot, is this bragginess. And, well, the thing is, like, they still haven't provided an explanation, an alternative to design for certain things, like digital information systems. They can brag all they want, but for all their knowledge, for all of their accomplishments, for all the good things they're doing, like curing cancer and all this stuff, and being on the dean's list and whatever, for all of that, they still don't have an alternative explanation to design. And true empiricism, he likes to talk about molecular machinery a lot. Well, they don't have a materialist explanation for that. That is an alternative to design. So, it's just a lot of hot air. That's just what I wanted to point out, because that went on for a long time the other night. I mean, it was like an hour, maybe it was hours. I don't know. I jumped out of it, and it was just a long time of just nothing, just nothing. I mean, the guy's saying, like, yeah, I do all this great stuff at school. I'm going to get this great, prestigious job at this place, and I'm awesome. Uh, but he wasn't saying anything.
Yeah, at some point, don't you have to talk the talk and walk the walk? You have to do both. I mean, you can't just talk the talk. At some
Yeah.
point, you've got
Well,
to
that's
put
kind
your
of
brain out there and let people see it and make a judgment based on something other than your rhetoric, because that can only go so far.
yeah. And for this guy talking the talk, he was saying that that's when he's at work, doing real work to
Hmm.
figure out cancer or whatever and all this stuff. And but that's not the point of our hangouts. Like, go ahead and do that, but have you explained the origin of digital information, the origin of molecular machinery from your materialist point of view? Have you done that? Have you offered an alternative, a causally adequate alternative? No, you still haven't done that, so you haven't walked the walk, so to speak. You're just talking about something that's beside the point. It's a hey, that's pretty cool. Good for you. Let me pat you on the back, but you still haven't answered the question. You still haven't created an argument. Well, Tommy, you go ahead and share your opinion for a second. I got a phone call here.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, I mean, it's a persuasive argument that, or it's a persuasive case that they like to put forth, and a lot of it usually is uh, bankrupt when it comes to actual explanations. Like you're talking about, True was, and he likes to talk about molecular machines. Well, regarding the flagellum, if those guys had an actual materialist explanation, the flagellum, along with everything else in nature, was supposed to come about by selected random mutations that happened over time. If they had that, then they wouldn't have to rely on the rhetoric and on the arrogance and on the bluster and all this stuff that they like to rely on. They could actually just point right to the science and say, look, it's right there. There's no discussion. There's no reason to act big. There's no reason to act smart. There's no reason to talk about what your job is or what your qualifications are or what the opponent's qualifications are not. None of that really comes into play when you can actually show the step-by-step process by which a flagellum, for example, came into existence by way of evolution. That's true of every process, every piece of anatomy throughout nature. I mean, that's what their job is to demonstrate, is that there was no intelligence needed, that it's all materialist, that the variation arises by chance, and that nature kind of operates like a rock, paper, scissors sort of thing, and it selects these chance events or chance variations that are most helpful, and it builds populations over time. But like I was telling somebody earlier, they can't even show that happening at all, ever. It's a good theory if it actually happened, but whether it be the flagellum or the heart or blood vessels or anything else, it's a just so theory that doesn't have any actual scientific backing. And so I think that's what the root of the problem is for those guys is that their position is so lacking in science and actual demonstrable science that they can actually set up and demonstrate, repeat, put on an experiment. None of that is even possible. If you think about it, with a chance, anything involving chance, you can't set that up experimentally. I mean, not very easily. And they don't. And so that's part of the problem, because everything in biology has to ultimately arise by chance, according to the materialist worldview. And so if it takes a 1,000 or 10,000 or 1,000,000 chance events to build a liver, for example, or a thorax, I'm just whatever, then their job is to show all these chance events that had to happen. And yes, that's a big job. That's a big hurdle to clear, but that's not our problem as creationists. That's your problem as those who are standing behind science. And they can't do it. I mean, they can't even start because they don't know where to start. Because their mutation events that they've shown in the past in science aren't the type of molecular activities that can actually build these types of features. So, and they've tried. But are you back?
Yeah, I'm back now.
Okay. So anyway, I was just to wrap up, I'll just say that it seems to me that if they had more actual evidence, scientific evidence to back themselves up, they wouldn't have to rely on this bluster, this arrogance, which, is a good tool sometimes. It can convince the uninformed and the ignorant occasionally. If you have people coming in on the fly who are kind of new at this and someone sounds all sciencey, then, that could be a good tool for persuasion. But, for people who are actually into this and a little more experience, it's not that impressive.
Yeah. Yeah, the braggadocio that can definitely be pretty persuasive, especially it's some of it's warranted. People who are studying science or whatever, who have done things in the field or whatever. But being persuasive is different from being correct.
Hmm.
Being persuasive is different from offering an argument. Um, Being persuasive, it's different from offering a materialist alternative to design. That there's a difference there. And when we get into these hangouts where somebody's puffing their chest out, we have to be quick to point out you're not offering an argument here. You're not offering an argument. You haven't answered the question. You haven't provided the alternative explanation from your side. Well, that's what I think we can do better at, is to be quicker to point out that they're not making an argument.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear. I sometimes I think that myself. It's like, sometimes these guys can come off like Sam, for example. Clearly, he's educated and knows the jargon, and all of that can sound very persuasive coming from him. Just listening to the jargon alone sounds persuasive. Um, but he's one of these guys, for example, who can talk in a way that he can say absolutely nothing really in reality, yet sound very impressive saying it. That's a good talent. I'm not knocking him. I wish I had that talent, but I don't. But the point is he's one of those guys, like he's the best they have to offer. But once again, even when he gets in the room, a lot of times it's like he doesn't really have any answers either. And so you have to wonder about the whole position. If the best guys, if the PhDs and all the people with the higher educations don't really have that much of an argument and have to rely on, as he does, with the rely on the personal insult, all that stuff as a debate tool, then you have to really wonder how strong their case is.
I think that's a really good point, um, for viewers to take with them is when you hear somebody in one of these hangouts or one of these videos and their whole modus operandi becomes, I'm going to insult this person, I'm going to belittle this person, I'm going to puff myself up. um, that's your hint that this person's not offering any conversation. This person is probably not offering any real argument. They're just saying, hey, you don't know what you're talking about, therefore listen to me. But the first time I talked to Sam, um, he did the same thing he always does. And he, very belittling, gaslighting, and but at the end of the day, I asked him, uh, are these systems, can they be said to be literally digital information systems? And he said yes, they can be described that way. And I wanted to know, is there a materialist explanation for how these things came about? And he seems very comfortable saying that no, we're still investigating that. His response isn't that intelligent cause doesn't produce these kinds of systems. His response isn't, oh, it's not literally a digital information system. His response is to belittle you, first of all. That's his primary go to response. But then he also has these other things like, you're just trying to bring God into it. Just because you don't understand something doesn't mean you could say God did it.
Mm-hmm.
And so here, that one's a little bit more seductive, even because it kind of paints the design argument a certain way. Hang up your hands. But even that right there, if you're a shrewd observer, you will see, well, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that the design hypothesis necessarily or inherently indicates deity. I personally have semantic issues with words like God or deity or whatever. Um, but I won't get off into that right now. But it's just a straw man saying you can't just appeal to God for everything. It's just a God of the gaps argument. No, that's not what it is.
Mm-hmm.
I've said many times we infer design, we infer intelligent cause from the effects known to be produced by intelligent cause, invariably in our experience. There's nothing about that that says, quote unquote, God, whatever that means. That's
Mm-hmm.
just a straw man.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that we rely, that wherever we don't know something, we say God did it. That is absolutely 100% wrong and incorrect. And these were the only responses offered by the best on their side. And it can be and sound persuasive, but it doesn't make it correct. It doesn't mean they've offered an argument.
Well, they're just
It doesn't
flipping
mean they
it.
haven't strawmanned.
They're just flipping it to an emotional thing for them or for their audience. They're flipping it from design, which is just as legitimate, if not more legitimate, of an explanation for the origin of something as is chance. You know, how chance is a considered a more legitimate explanation for the origin of something than design is. I have no idea, but I've often wondered this. I want to bounce this off of you. Like, let's just say, just for the sake of argument, that science, like a scientist, was able to create life in the lab. So would that be then unscientific if that were the case? I mean, to go backwards then and say, well, then how did this new life form come about? If say someone didn't know, or even within the scientific community, to me, if they're going to admit that it's scientific that a scientist created a new life form, then they would then have to admit that life forms that exist on Earth now, that intelligence, that would have to be a scientific possibility as well. I mean, whatever happened to just looking at the evidence, rounding up the evidence, and then making a deduction? Maybe, I don't know if that's the right word, but making rounding up all the evidence and making a scientific assertion or hypothesis based on the accumulation of evidence. I mean, how is that how to come up with the idea that design is responsible for things? How would that be illogical as opposed to, say, chance? Maybe I'm talking in a bad circle, but
No, it
I
makes
don't know
sense.
if you're trying to round up the evidence, it seems scientific to follow the evidence where it leads. And if it leads to design, then that's just as scientific as chance.
Yeah, absolutely. Why do we preclude intelligent cause from science? Why should we preclude
Yeah.
intelligent cause from science? Why? I mean, we can ask this question. If biological life had an intelligent cause, how would science determine that? You think my argument is bad, so you offer your better way of doing it. That's what we can ask. You offer the way that you think that science should do it. If you don't like this way, you have a go at it. You tell
Well, they
me if you
reject they
believe me
reject
or
one they reject one out of hand, though. That's the problem. Right out of the gate, they reject one.
yeah, and why? See,
It's
that's my question is why? There's never a good answer for why they preclude design or intelligent cause from science. There's never a good reason. It's science can't study the supernatural. Why?
Well, even that's a straw man, right? Design doesn't necessarily have to mean supernatural, because you could have mind, consciousness, aliens. You could have a variety of
Mm-hmm.
quote unquote natural explanations
Yeah,
for life, but
yeah,
there would be design woven into that, but they still reject all of that out of hand. So to me,
Yeah,
it's a
and I guess
non-scientific. It's a non-scientific. They're doing it for non-science reasons. They're doing it for political reasons or religious reasons or anti-religious reasons.
I mean, there does seem to be some kind of a bias there, a bias at play because I mean, these people
Yeah.
are. I think they are smarter than this. They're smarter than this. Um, they're smarter than to say that science can't study a certain thing just a priori, as a premise. Science can't do something. Yeah, how do you know? How are you making this universal negative claim? Why? On what basis? On what grounds are you doing that? And there is none. The only thing that it ever comes back to is, well, the design hypothesis inevitably leads to supernatural explanation. Well, explain to me what supernatural means. See, my problem is I think there's a lot of semantics going on here. And any definition of supernatural I've ever heard, it's either applied very inconsistently or it's just incoherent. And like, what does supernatural mean? Does it mean it exists outside of our universe? Well, what about the multiverse hypothesis? Is that a hypothesis about the supernatural? Are you going to tell these physicists and mathematicians that they're being unscientific, even though they're published in the mainstream literature? I mean, really, I mean, and there's no logical connection. uh, there's no logical argument why science can't study something that is quote supernatural. I mean, let's say that something happened in nature, something that we don't really understand, um, and maybe it seems like it's supernatural. Okay, are we just gonna throw up our hands and quit and say, "Oh, we can't explain that because it's supernatural," or do we actually try to explain it and figure it out and see how it works? why why does anybody on any side, but mostly on the materialist side, argue that science has to throw up its hands? That science cannot follow the causal chain that produced this effect. Why? There's no reason for it. But
It may be the money,
oh
the funding, because they're not going to get funding if they're going to end up in Sunday school. If the evidence takes them to Sunday school class, then they're not going to get any money for it. And that's probably at the root of a lot of this.
yeah, I guess there's another interesting question that I like to ask sometimes. If it was proven beyond the shadow of a doubt, like absolutely proven, that God exists, we had very hard evidence for this. Would we be able to teach this fact in schools?
Yeah, it wouldn't be scientific, would it?
I don't know.
I mean, if he
What's the
just because
purpose of
he,
science? Is it to preclude religion, or is it to elucidate truth?
yeah, it should be to investigate the truth and to uncover the mysteries of the universe. But they're going to see God as just another giant mystery, I guess.
Yeah.
So that's not going to answer anything for them. I think if they knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that God exists, they would probably still try to trick people. It would be my guess. Just like Satan knows God exists. Not to bring religion into it, but Satan knew darn well God exists, and he's a deceiver. That's what he does. That's his calling card, and so that's his minions are going to do the same thing.
Mm.
Would be my guess.
Yeah. Well, and all of that to say, um, a lot of the objections are they're inherently fallacious. They might look good, but it's not an argument. It might look good, but they haven't answered the question. Um, it might look good, for them to say, "Oh, you're just trying to mix the supernatural or mix worlds." It might sound good and correct to say that, but it's the straw man. That's not the claim. That's not the argument. So I think for viewers, they have to be pretty shrewd, and they have to understand. And that's kind of what I wanted to say. That's the idea I wanted to get out there. You have to make sure that you are understanding the argument that you're addressing, and as viewers, you have to make sure that you are properly understanding the sides that are representing themselves, and not just gravitate to one side or the other. You have to make sure you're first understanding the argument before you can properly evaluate their argument. And I think what a lot of these people do are very braggy. They do a disservice to that dialogue by distracting, by appealing to their own authority, or by misrepresenting the argument. They're doing a huge disservice to the conversation. And I think we have to be really careful about recognizing that as viewers and as participants. And as participants, we have to really, I think, make sure that we're pointing that out early on.
Yeah, just to put an explanation point on this, just to give it a quick example, today and yesterday, over at PZ Meyer's YouTube channel, he's got a video entitled "I Hate Cancer and Cancer Quacks." And I made a post under that a couple days ago. And I won't get into the details of our little conversation, which is only about 5 or 6 posts long, but I challenged him on a couple things and then demonstrated him to be wrong. And basically, he has ended up with this sentence: "Go away. I'm not interested in discussing cancer with an incompetent fraud who will abuse the conversation to peddle quackery." So he avoided my questions. He won't watch my video. He won't engage me. He won't. I've asked him to do all of those, and that's what he ended up with. So it's just it's just so common. And I even told him on there, I said, I'm just a guy, and I'm trying to engage you. He's a famous guy, famous scientist, who, if anybody should be able to put up a good, strong fight and put me in my place, it should be him. But look at him. I mean, he's just like all the rest of them, and he's not impressive. And I'm just sitting here, and what does it take? You and I both have this frustration with, I would like nothing else to engage somebody who is knowledgeable on the other side and can actually have an honest conversation, a friendly conversation where you actually discuss things intelligently. And you know what I mean? Try to dig into each other's brains and tease stuff out, and come to an understanding at least, or attempt to find the truth without the garbage, without the the personal insults and just the soap opera and the drama. All that stuff, is just so ridiculous. I mean, it's just such a distraction, from what's important.
Yeah, and that was the funny thing about the other night in Drew's hangout, was the guy he invited actually said, like, "I just do these hangouts for the fun of it, just for the drama. That's what the people want. Give the people what they want. They want the drama, and I'm just here for kicks."
Yeah.
And that was kind of funny because I think we all kind of knew that already. But I think maybe we were kind of hoping that maybe there might be some interest in the conversation. But really, the larger interest on that side is actually in the drama.
But look, Brandon, they won't.
Funny admission.
There's several of them that will refuse to put their reputation on the line. What they think they have, what they think the reputation is, they refuse to test it, against someone like Drew or someone like myself, or anybody who's even halfway knowledgeable, because they don't really have anything to gain, and they have everything to lose. They're puffed up. Image of themselves and their inflated ego, could be easily punctured. and so they often will refuse to engage in an intellectual discussion. And I think that sounds like a defense mechanism, you know, what you just described of this person, that they're just there for the giggles, and which is kind of code for I'm too good for them. I'm not even going to try. I don't have to try. You know, the audience will just understand that I'm so out of their league that I don't even have to try. You know, and that may work for some people, but for the rest of us, it's not terribly impressive.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
It's rare, you know, we're talking off air. It's rare to find somebody, and it's actually kind of a cool thing if you can actually find somebody who you can have a dialogue with, you know, without worrying about them trying to play gotcha, you know, in all the soap opera games, or taking something out of context, or taking something you said and making a video about it, or making a post about it, trying to humiliate you. You know, I mean, that's going to happen, but you know, it's nice just to be able to lay stuff out and not worry about that.
I thought it was always like really weird. Like none of them has ever been willing to talk to me one-on-one.
Mm-hmm.
Not on air, not on my channel. The thing that I think happens all the time is you'll go into a channel that has like a quote-unquote panel of people.
Yes.
All that stuff is, again, that you know, air of arrogance a little bit there. So you go on, they'll only talk to you if you go on their channel and talk with their panel.
Yep.
And but they won't you know, they won't ever talk to me one-on-one.
There's strength in numbers.
And I always thought that was just kind of a little bit weird. I mean, it seems like they are afraid to do that.
Yeah.
But then, like, I know that they would laugh at that suggestion, but, like, what is the explanation there? And I think it's just they have this gang mentality.
Mm-hmm.
And they are just in it for the drama and whatever. You know, I've had other people, and this is the other really important point. I've spoken with other people who are great to talk to. It's not as common to find those people, but they're out there, and there's more than one of them. There are several people out there that you can have a good conversation with. And I think those are the people we need to spend our time with, and we need to invest our energy with, is people who actually want to have a conversation. And not these people who are into all this drama.
Yep, I agree.
I think we get somewhere. Like back a year and a half ago, when I started getting into these hangouts a little bit more, and started focusing on that group of people that can actually have a conversation, there was some interest being generated in intelligent design, and some people were kind of like, you know, I can kind of see, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And you get some people who have had kind of a lot of drama with some other people, and now they're kind of asking like honest questions, like being a little bit more charitable to the arguments. And I think I want to do that more, as I, you know, hopefully will have more time to do that, and hopefully other people will also begin engaging the people that are worthwhile to have a conversation with. I think that
Yeah, I mean, it's actually a much more appealing
conversation.
It's a much more appealing hangout, you know, as the other has its, you know, has its fireworks, and there'll be a certain audience that's attracted to that, but ultimately you're going to drive when those, and I've been in them many times, you know, with the other side and with their panel, and it's fun to some degree, but the thing is, and it's very much of a challenge, but ultimately though, like when Steve used to have these, you know, for example, you know, I mean, ultimately we just start arguing and nothing gets accomplished, and you know, the games start and the drama starts. But ultimately, what happens is you drive the two camps apart, and that's kind of what has happened now. Is like you really can't get me or True or you really or anybody on our side isolated in a serious conversation with them. It's not that I'm saying they're chicken. It's just when you have that sort of atmosphere and there's just that generated that kind of anger and sometimes hate, between the personalities because of, the type of hangouts that they are, then you're just going to create an atmosphere where it's just no fun, and the sides don't like each other. And so it's much better. And I've done a few of them on my own where I say at the outset, it's like, okay, no, this is just going to be a chill conversation because it's much more interesting to actually, open up your brain and compare notes, than to do the other stuff. But yeah, I think that'd be great, if you did that more often. I think there would be a big, there's an interest, I think, or could be with that.
Yeah, one of the funny things to me from the other night was in True's Hangout, the guy was saying, we've tried to have, these conversations. We tried to do like literature review hangouts, and they don't get any views. Nobody's interested in this stuff. They just want the drama and stuff. So I'm just here for my kicks, just having a good time, just just for the drama. And it was funny he was admitting that too, but then it was also funny he was admitting that when he tries to talk about serious things that nobody watches it. But when I went on Helena's YouTube channel about a year and a half ago or whatever, and we talked about intelligent design, it was one of the first hangouts where two people can have it. We're having an actual cordial, polite, interesting conversation about design, people on different sides of it, and that was immediately her video with the most views. So there's an interest out there. If these guys aren't getting their views when they try to talk about these issues or these topics, then they're doing it wrong. Maybe people want to have a real conversation. Maybe people are curious about these things. Maybe people are actually curious about what each side of the topic says. Maybe people are curious about the design arguments and the response to the design arguments, or the materialist arguments and the responses to the materialist arguments. And maybe there is a segment of people that they're really interested in that more than they're interested in all of the drama. So it was just funny that he was admitting that when they try to talk about these things, they don't get any views.
Yeah, but that's all relative anyway.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, but proved that people are super interested in it. They just don't know how to do it without drama.
Yeah, but even if that were true, I mean, we're talking like on my channel, my average is maybe 150, 200 views, maybe. I don't really check, but even some of the other guys who have a bigger audience than I do, it's not like they're into the tens of thousands or anything. I think JD's is one of the biggest ones around, and his is even pretty small, compared to just go to your random, I don't know, just like a cooking YouTube thing, video on YouTube, and it'll have 50,000 or 150,000 views or a million views. And, we're here in this little community and we might have a few hundred on a good, on a good video. So it's really pretty much in-house, and it's going to be in-house people watching it for whatever reason. I mean, it's the most important stuff on the planet to some degree. I mean, in a lot of ways, for people who are searching for the truth, but yet it's just not a big draw of people. So I don't find that argument particularly persuasive anyway, that, what's the difference between getting 250 views and 400 views? I mean, yeah, it's a little bit different, but why sacrifice some quality, possibly some really cool interactions for just a few more views?
I don't know. I guess They have different interests. Well, we've got somebody viewing. We had a couple people earlier, and then now we have somebody again.
Wow.
And just wondering if they wanted to ask any questions. We do have the live chat open, so feel free to ask away. Um, but yeah, I think it's somebody has to go first to elevate the conversation. Someone has to do it first.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of focus, because when somebody gets in there, they start bragging and all this stuff. Triggers something. You want to be like, you're not that great. Just stop it already. And you want to get into it. It makes you want to fight or argue or whatever. But the bottom line is, okay, you're awesome. You're wonderful. You're way better than me. I suck compared to you. I accept all of your premises about that. I accept all of them. Now, can you please explain to me where digital information systems come from?
Yeah, I agree. In fact, I pulled that myself a while back when I was talking to Drag. I was like, I'm just, for the sake of argument, admitting up front that I'm an idiot. I'll just say it. I'm stupid.
Yeah.
I admit all of that.
We should begin every conversation with that. Let's set up the premise here. I'm a total idiot. I don't know anything. The guy I'm talking to right now, he knows everything. He's an expert. He barely has any time for me. He's just doing this for the fun of it, just because he likes to kill small animals and torture them. That's just something he enjoys to do when he's not saving the world from cancer and war and global warming and whatever. But he has graciously decided to come talk to me, and I know nothing.
Yes.
And now, if he can please answer this question, that would be amazing.
And there's no reason for them to insert the random insult about how uninformed or uneducated that their opponent is, because that's already been established at the beginning. So there's no reason to retread that. So yeah, I think that's a good tactic. Just get that out of the way.
Yeah, let's just get this out of the way. I just want to, first of all, as a premise, I'm a total idiot. This guy's a total genius. Okay?
Yeah.
That's settled. Non-negotiable. It's inarguable. That's it. Now, here's what I have to say.
Let's get to the actual issue. That's brilliant.
Yeah.
Which brings up another point. You don't have to be a genius to argue any of this. I mean, you need to have a modicum of being informed, but you don't necessarily have to have a high IQ. You don't have to necessarily, have a higher education. In fact, there's a lot of just having the truth on your side sometimes can pull a lot of weight, or having the actual evidence on your side that can make up a lot of ground for people who aren't as educated as others, when you're in a conversation, because you can actually bring up evidence that's already on the books and say, hey, look, this is contradicting what you're saying. It's contradicting, your position. So they can have a PhD. Who cares? But if their position isn't strong and doesn't match up with the evidence, then what's going to win? The evidence.
Yeah, and I think the thing that you have to realize is it doesn't matter where you are in life, what you've accomplished, educationally, professionally, whatever. People are human beings. They are susceptible to distorted thinking. They're susceptible to fallacious thinking. And it's very easy to point these things out. Yeah, It's not complicated. You don't need a PhD to point out that, no, God of the Gaps is not my argument. That is a straw man of my argument. My argument is that we can recognize the effects of intelligent cause from the effects known to be produced by intelligent cause.
Mm-hmm.
We can infer intelligent cause from its effects. So it doesn't take a whole lot, to point these things out, which is also kind of it's also why it's I don't know if confusing is the right word, but it makes me raise an eyebrow when people who are supposedly so smart will get your argument so wrong.
Yeah,
And
that's a
it
good point.
almost seems like it's intentional, and maybe it is because in True's hangout the other day, the guy did say he openly said he's in it for the drama. I don't know. Is some of it intentional? Do they intentionally get the argument wrong? At this point, anything's possible. I mean,
Hmm.
maybe so.
Yeah, I mean, if you're in it for the drama, then that person is likely to just say something just for the sake of trying to start an argument, start a war, get into gotcha stuff and get off the topic, or misrepresent your position and not be honest about any of it. So you have to wonder about their intentions if that's what they actually say.
Yeah, I mean, smart people can believe stupid things, right? I think that
Oh yeah,
smart people can also make stupid arguments.
yeah, yeah. That
One
happens
of the
all the
stupid
time.
argu- one of the stupid arguments is, "Hey, I'm awesome, and you're not awesome at all. You're not even remotely awesome at anything in life. In fact, I'm going to insult what you do for a living to
Yeah.
just really prove that I know better about this unrelated topic."
Hmm.
So, um,
Oh yeah.
smart
The,
people can make stupid arguments.
yeah. I've gotten all kinds of quote unquote arguments against me in that way. Regarding physical appearance. Uh, the hat. I can wear if I wear a hat. I get that I get made fun of for that. I get made fun of for my voice, my hair,
Tommy,
variety of things.
You got a crap haircut.
Yeah,
Therefore, God doesn't exist.
you're stupid, and you don't
I
really
don't like
deserve to
your
be
shirt.
on camera with me.
I
Yeah,
don't like your shirt. Therefore, science can't discern the effects of intelligence.
yeah. I've come to the conclusion that they will hate pretty much anything and everything about me, uh, just simply because of my positions. So whether it's my hair or my shirt, or my voice or my face or whatever, my laugh, whatever, it's all hated. They hate all of it, and it's used against me.
Yeah, but Tommy, they have PhDs, so you
True.
have to just like roll with it. You know,
Yes. I mean, I
I
should
mean,
bow down to them.
if a PhD tells you to jump on the treadmill, then obviously your argument is wrong.
Yeah. Oh, that's very common too. Is the PhD argument? It's like, who are you to even question the PhD? It's like, regardless of the fact that there are other PhDs all over the place that disagree with them. The fact that I'm not a
Yeah,
PhD, I don't even deserve to even be in the same room or talk to them, much less disagree with them.
hmm and that's kind of where it gets a little more seductive. All the fallacious arguing, the distorted thinking, it gets a little bit seductive because it's the PhD just walked in the room.
Yeah.
We need to stop. We need to reset our brains. We need to wipe down the whiteboard, start fresh here, and just anticipate whatever this PhD is going to say here. Now, whatever they say, it means you're wrong. It doesn't matter what it is that they say. As long as they say something, it means you're wrong about whatever it is that you just said, which I didn't even listen to and can't explain back to you. But because a PhD is also speaking at the same time that you're speaking, it means you're wrong.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I don't know. When I I kind of bash PhDs a lot, but I actually do respect them. I mean, I like to listen to them because usually, not all the time, clearly on here, but usually when you have a PhD speaking, they don't generally need to resort to that. Um, and so when they actually will speak in an intelligent way and make an actual point and not resort to the personal insults, then that's worth listening to. But
Yeah. It's really funny. I'm looking at the chat here, and it's who are you to question the achievements of science and reason, or who are you to insult a PhD or whatever, or to disagree with the PhD? That's exactly what I'm talking about. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Saying that somebody has a PhD is not an argument.
no.
It's not an argument for anything. Why is it that people are so eager to take the easy way out of an argument? Why? Wouldn't you rather have a conversation, explore different ideas, than cheat yourself out of it by taking that shortcut straight to the PhD, and you get to whatever conclusion you wanted to get to at the beginning? I mean, if you wanted to go that route, appeal to popularity, appeal to authority, appeal to somebody being awesome. I mean, why even bother?
Yeah, it's just kind of
first place.
It's just the lazy way, the non-intellectual way to, brush you and your argument aside. It's just to dismiss you because you're not as qualified as them. Heck with the actual issue at hand, on the table that you're talking about. To heck with that, and to heck with your point, and to heck with the idea that the PhD may or may not be able to refute your point. None of that matters. It's just all in qualifications.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, the comments are pretty funny here in the chat. I mean, the easy way is telling them they're wrong without doing the work yourself. Hey, you know what? We have when somebody can explain back the argument charitably without straw manning it, then I will accept that. Maybe. As it is, I've never heard anybody on the other side actually say, with the exception of a very, very small handful of people who are in the minority, but they are the minority that can accurately explain back an opposed view, which is weird that not many people can do that. But most people, they will say that the intelligent design argument is a God of the gaps argument. It's not structured in that way. That's not the structure of the argument. You can disagree with it. Go ahead and disagree with it. But calling it a God of the gaps argument is not the structure of the argument. It's a positive inference. You might disagree with it. You might say the evidence isn't there. But the structure of the argument is not God of the gaps. And here we go, legitimate journals.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just hilarious. Like, nobody wants to. They just want to dig their heels in. They just want to dig their heels in and skip the conversation. That's what they want to do. Dig their heels in and skip the conversation. They want to say, yeah, well, all of these journals in the scientific literature says one particular thing, and therefore I don't have to listen to your argument. Therefore, your arguments are wrong.
The other dynamic I find really interesting is there's a weird thing, a weird undercurrent that not only do you have the PhD who is up on the pedestal, but you'll have the dynamic that there's a certain group of followers who are just normal people, but it's almost like it's like the kind of person who tries to be in the in crowd in high school or junior high, by hanging around the cool people. And it seems like there's a lot of that happens. It's like they kind of snuggle in close to the PhD and let them do their, I don't know. It's almost kind of like being in a clique. So there's a lot of that, that I've noticed that. And those are the people who tend to, a lot of times, will appeal to the PhD and use those types of arguments as, as a tool for debate.
Yeah.
So
It's
it's not too cool to be a creationist, I
so
guess. It's much cooler to be the follower of the PhD materialist. You know,
yeah, somewhat. Yep.
and then you have to wonder about who's the person who's actually doing their own thinking. Is it the person who follows along and huddles under the wing of the PhD and lets them feed their brain and fill their brain with everything, or the person who does their own investigation comes up with a different conclusion than your random PhD, is willing to go on air and discuss it with them intellectually, and is dying for someone to actually have a an honest dialogue with. Who's the person who's more intellectually impressive? I mean, the person who avoids, like the person you're talking about the other night on that hangout, who's just there for the kicks or the giggles or whatever, just for the drama. Is that more impressive? Who's just, he totes the company line, he doesn't engage. There's lots of appeal to authority. There's lots of appeal to his own education. Or the person who gets on camera and says, "PhDs, come talk to me. I would love to debate you." Which is more impressive? I think number two is, but that's just me.
Yeah, I mean, having a conversation. You mean to tell me that you think having a conversation uh, is more intellectual than insulting your mom?
Well, it depends on who you're talking to, I guess. Some people find that impressive.
Tony Hooper's here. Hooper here is like, write it up, Tommy, and collect your Nobel Prize. I think Tony might actually get a Nobel Prize if he explains to us how material causes can produce digital information systems. So, by all means.
Well, let me just ask you, since you asked that, what have you come across? Have you come across anyone who has answered that question, whether they be PhD or just anyone, in a way that has impressed you or caused you to sit back and ponder or pause, question yourself? Has anyone come up with an answer to that?
No, nobody that I've talked to has had an answer to that. The most bombastic people on that side, who are the most belittling people on their side, the most qualified people on their side, have not answered that question. They just distract by insulting me or saying that I just am trying to sneak religion into the science classroom or whatever.
Right.
In fact, most of the time when I talk about it, I, you know, I'm not like some kind of scientist or whatever, and I only can squeeze in so much time for reading about this. Yet, nevertheless, I'm more familiar with the latest information about the progress being made on these questions. And the latest I've heard is there was there were some experiments done where a code was sort of kind of produced, but the researcher said it relies on a prior code anyway, so it's not really a solution to the problem. It was extremely rudimentary, and basically the code was baked into the system. But it was really good research, and it was a really good experiment and everything. See, I don't have a problem saying that that the research to solve this problem, which problem from a materialist point of view, is good, that it's good research. I just don't think the problem has been solved. And I think that the argument to design is a positive argument. And so when I've asked people about this, they don't say, well, I just heard about this experiment that was done, and they actually produced a digital information system, or they solved this problem. I don't hear that. I hear, well, science can't study God, or science can't study the supernatural, or you're just making an argument from ignorance. That's what I hear.
Yeah.
by and large, the vast majority of responses is a complete straw man. And most people who criticize me or my arguments, or not really my arguments, the design arguments, they can't explain the argument back to you. And when people come at me with these snide comments, one of the first things I like to ask them is, okay, can you please explain back to me the design argument? And that'll help me evaluate whether or not I should continue the conversation. Most of
Mm-hmm.
the time, I shouldn't.
They're probably, it's a combination of not being terribly familiar with the argument and or not listening, or sometimes, like we were talking about before, person or purposefully trying to distort the argument. So there's a lot of that going on. Yeah, I'm just curious if you had anybody who had really successfully attempted or managed to come up with a response that was intelligent and thought provoking. Because I don't ever really get into that argument myself. I was just curious what you came up with. But so even in your reading though, because there's some pretty smart people out there who will, in print in various locations have thoughtful, commentary to that.
Yeah, I mean the only thing that I've seen is the suggestion that there are certain patterns that we can observe in the way that certain proteins manifest, or their code manifests. I can't even explain it really well right now. I'm multitasking, but you can see some of these arguments on and what is that site? They're Christians who promote evolutionary theory.
Oh, is it Biologos?
Yeah, Biologos.
Yeah.
And they tried to make an argument to that effect, that these patterns suggest a materialistic explanation, but that is actually an argument from ignorance. They don't understand a pattern, therefore nature did it.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, we have a pattern that is positively correlated with intelligent cause, and they're ignoring that. So I think maybe that's probably the best that I've seen. But there's no answer. There's not been an answer. I've seen some research. Very, very few researchers that I've seen are actually addressing that question. Most of the time, they're just saying, "Oh, bacteria evolved the ability to metabolize sulfur, whatever, something like that."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But then they're ignoring arguments from Behe and what's the name, Snoke or whatever, that it's not about whether or not organisms or life forms can evolve new abilities per se. It's the scope of that. It's how far can we extrapolate from that. And they've done the math, and there are strict limits. And you can't just say, "Oh, a bacteria can eat sulfur now," and then think that you've made an argument, because the prior argument is that this falls within what we can expect. This falls within the boundaries of what we can expect from nature. It doesn't fall outside of those strict boundaries at all. So yeah, I mean, I guess that's the other thing. Like, if they were familiar with the argument, they would understand what they need to argue. But so often they don't.
Yeah.
They just think that you can just extrapolate indefinitely, and that I'm arguing, for God, a God of the
I'm surprised they even admit, like you said, Sam did earlier, that it's actually digital information. That they would admit that's a feature within the organism or within the cell. Because my interactions with them, they seem to, a lot of them, and granted they're probably ignorant to some degree about it, but they deny information exists at all. They'll just say it's all chemical. It's all chemistry and all physics. And so they deny the information to begin with. So I'm surprised you didn't get a lot of that.
Yeah. So what they're saying is that the signal components are not discrete and quantized in the DNA. DNA. I mean, these things have real definitions. It's not as though you could say, "Oh, everything's just matter and energy, and therefore nothing is anything."
Yeah,
you know,
that's
these
what they
things
need it to be,
have
though.
discrete definitions. I mean, discrete boundaries to these concepts. Um, yeah. So,
Yeah, I have the same problem
anyways, but
with like I'll challenge them periodically with some, like someone said earlier today, was it today or yesterday? I don't remember. Regarding the notion that speciation, that science has observed speciation, the evolutionary mechanism is proven, and I will say, okay, well, I'd like to see that. Show me the evidence of that happening.
yeah.
And inevitably they'll
Well,
show me something that doesn't at all qualify for what I'm talking about, for some sort of a scientifically confirmed, demonstrable situation where they confirm speciation. It doesn't happen. It's the same thing with, True and I make the challenge all the time to show us a mutation that adds functional selectable anatomy, something new, some new anatomical feature, and they can't answer that either. There's lots of them, and so this is a common thing that I think that goes back to what the point of this was. The braggadocious is like there's so much that they can't answer. When they're intellectually pinned against the wall and they can't move, so there's not much else that they can hang their hat on besides their qualifications or the lack of ears. You know.
hmm. Now I'm getting a lot of comments in the chat about how there's never been a good design argument and all this stuff. But I still haven't seen anybody actually try to articulate in a charitable way the design argument. I would like to see that in the chat. Will somebody please explain to me in your own words? Don't Google this or anything. Don't copy and paste from the Discovery Institute. I want you in your own words because you're already commenting an opinion about it. So your opinion, as of your comment criticizing design, how would you explain what the design argument is? Go ahead. I'd be very curious to see if anybody can actually articulate it in a charitable way. And that's the pattern that I see so much is people will say, oh, design is stupid, you're stupid for believing design. And when I ask them to explain it, you get crickets. You get crickets. Yep. So nobody is okay. So Blue is saying that I should tell everybody else what the design argument is. Well, I actually already did. If for those who are listening, I actually already did explain several times what the design argument is, but I don't know if anybody heard it, and I don't know if anybody criticizing design can actually articulate the design argument in a charitable way. But anyways, all of that to say, when you see all this braggadocio, all these bombastic people who come into these hangouts, don't be fooled by that, ask yourself, what is the mode of argument that they're employing? Is it to be insulting? Is it to be belittling? Is it to appeal to authority? Have they actually offered an argument? Have they actually responded to the other side? Or have they just outsourced the argument? Hey, maybe you think that outsourcing it to a PhD is valid. Fine, okay, but they've outsourced it. So what is the argument that they've outsourced? What is it? What is that? What is that argument? I'm not asking for you to rely on somebody else's opinion or somebody else's ability to argue. I'm asking you to argue. And that doesn't mean saying, I have a PhD and you're stupid. That's not an argument. It's not, oh, I have a job that actually. That's not an argument. Well, come on, let's have a conversation. There are some people I've had good conversations with, but when I see people go into these hangouts and they're just bragging and everything, I have to point out that they haven't argued anything. They haven't argued anything. And I think that's probably where I'm going to wrap up tonight, because I have to get up pretty early in the morning, but I'll probably fire this up again tomorrow. I've got a couple other points that we can talk about. So,
well, good to see you again, Brandon.
Yeah, well, it's good to be a little bit more involved than I have been over the past year or so.
Yeah, you need to start coming around more.
Has articulated. Yeah, I don't think anybody has articulated the design argument yet in the chat. So I can't say I didn't expect that, but so but we'll see. Maybe next time we'll get somebody who can charitably articulate design. I have a few pals on the materialist side who don't believe in design or creationism or anything. They're atheists. They're materialists. They believe in evolution and everything. I do have a few pals on that side who actually can articulate design from in a charitable way. They can correctly articulate the design argument. And nevertheless, they disagree. You know, being able to articulate the argument doesn't mean you agree with it. You have to be able to entertain the idea, even if you disagree with it. Okay, and so far I don't see anybody trying to articulate it. So, but maybe next time we'll get somebody who can. Anyways, I'm out for the night. Again, the point of all this is don't be persuaded. Don't be persuaded by people who are just puffing their chests out. It's not an argument. And with that, I'm signing off. So, good night, Tommy, and good night, everybody else.